Welcome to everybody who's joined us as participants from around the globe. I am Sharon Constanson, Chairman of the South African Chamber of Commerce, and I welcome you here to our webinar, which we're running out of London. But interesting enough, we have on our panel somebody who is in Sydney, somebody in Dubai, a couple of us in London, and a few are in Johannesburg. So we are a very globally dispersed panel. And interesting enough, we would never be able to achieve this in the days pre the COVID, where we got used to now operating in a Zoom webinar environment. The series of webinars that the Chamber is running at the moment is focusing on business, on trade, professional needs that our members might have, networking opportunities, personal added wealth, health and welfare types of topics, and some social activities now and then as well. What is important is we remain relevant to our members, and that is what we're doing and taking innovative steps as COVID is lengthening and becoming longer. We're having to be more innovative and relevant to our members. The format of this afternoon will be, you have a fairly large panel, 4 people that we'll be talking to, and they'll be moderated by Andy, who's an expert in this industry as well. We have 4 panelists. Sorry, we have within the 4 of the panelists that we have the government, the South African government, we have a provider in the BPO environment, we have a supplier in that, I'm getting myself, whenever you try and read something in a hurry, it's the last thing you're capable of doing. So we've got government, we've got a provider, we've got a supplier, we've got the public private growth initiative, and we have a customer in this environment as well, and we have a CEO of the association. Andy will give you a perspective on the industry and how this industry has responded to the needs of COVID and has managed to get the requirements of keeping people employed, keeping businesses operating, keeping back offices operating efficiently through the negotiations they have done with government, and have maintained an industry and actually have grown this industry during the period. We will be taking questions, but it'll only be on the Q&A function. So please type up your questions anonymously or otherwise. I will be collating all your questions at a later point in the session, in the second half, and we'll be co-joining and bringing common themes together to bring those questions to the relevant individuals. If there's one person you specifically want to answer your question, please state it in it, and we will put those questions to it. We won't be answering all questions, that's usually not possible, but if there's anything specific, please email us afterwards. I will put my email address up, and you can then make contact with us, and we will pass it on to the relevant people through those that are on the panel, so that you get the answers that you require. I'd like to introduce Andy at this point. Andy is CEO of BPESA. BPESA is the Association for Global Business Services in South Africa. He was, as his CV seems to read, he was born and bred in the BPO industry right from the early days. So he's been in it a few decades now. And he's worked everything from advising in the industry to implementation, from strategy to even helping people find locations within the country from which they can service their customers. He's truly the energy of the association and drives the sector and the successes of that sector, and is very much the voice of that sector at this point in time. So I'd like to ask Andy to bring on his camera and to join us in this this point of the conversation, so that I can hand over to him. And Andy will set the scene in terms of the industry, and then he will chat to each of the panelists one at a time, and then we'll move into question times, and we will close our closing comments just before the hour, and then we will be done. So I hand over at this point to Andy Searle. Thank you very much.
Sharon, good afternoon, and thank you very much for having me and also my colleagues on the panel, who I'll introduce the audience to shortly. Good afternoon, good evening, and in some cases, good morning to those who are on the webinar and have joined. We're really grateful to have this opportunity to talk a little bit about South Africa, talk a bit about the global business services sector, connect the dots between what we are doing here, what the opportunities and challenges are that you face in the UK. And I'm confident that during the course of this session, with the inputs from the panelists and your questions and their answers, it'll be a fruitful session. So just to set some context, which you may or may not already have had through the press and also in the pre-reads for this webinar, I'll start off by zooming into the global business services sector and use that as the lens through which we can talk about the experience of COVID and the impact it's had on us, on the economy, on people, and importantly, the opportunities it's created through all this challenge that we want to focus on as we look to a new future. It's a relatively large sector in South Africa. It employs over 200,000 people in the domestic market in both the captive and the outsourced environment. And it employs just over 65,000 people servicing clients in countries around the world. And you'll get to engage with the operators and clients in some case in the panel a little bit later. So you can imagine then that like elsewhere in the world, when the pandemic spread and reached South Africa and we too went into lockdown, this sector and the rest of the country took an enormous knock. And what was different in South Africa to many countries, but not all, is that in our particular sector, through the relationship we have with our national government, and one of our government partners is on the panel, we were able, with support from the business lobbying groups, and one of our colleagues is on the panel to speak about that, to in advance prepare for the lockdown and ensure that this sector could be declared an essential or critical service provider and could continue without interruption to service the domestic and the international client base, who were themselves going through great difficulty and needed continuity in service. Of course, that was done with certain conditions, and we'll talk about more of those through the course of the afternoon. But it really did challenge everybody to work together and find innovative ways to collaboratively tackle the pandemic in South Africa, minimize the risk of exposure to our workforce across the board, preserve industry and businesses and jobs, and see it through to get to a position where we are now, where we're starting to look at the tail end of it, hopefully, and look towards a new future. So this has put a spotlight on South Africa, something that we felt in the context of what is often just gloomy news, we could share something positive in today's webinar and panel conversation, and that's what we are really looking forward to doing in a short moment. Thank you, Sharon.
Thanks, Andy. That was great. I appreciated you answered a question I was going to ask you, so I'm not going to ask you because you have already answered it very effectively as to who is BPESA and how you got yourselves stated and classified as an essential service provider. So can I hand back to you, Andy, so that you can have an enjoyable session with your panel?
Thank you, Sharon. So the format that we thought we would take with the panelists is to start off with an introduction, and we will go one by one. And I will, after introducing each of the panelists, ask them to say a few words about their particular experience of this context that we find ourselves in. And that will include, but not necessarily everything, but we'll touch on aspects like the impact of COVID, the challenges that they've experienced from their world, their perspective, the opportunities, the vision and hope that they have for the future. Also talking about our relationship between South Africa and the UK and what does this all mean to that relationship. And hopefully they'll be able to share some thoughts about what they believe would be valuable takeouts for you as an audience in today's session. So that's the format, and it gives me great pleasure to start by welcoming and introducing Tanya Cohen to you. So Tanya is the coordinator for the Public-Private Growth Initiative, abbreviated the PPGI. Tanya has worked with business organizations. She was previously the CEO of Business Unity South Africa. She's worked with government and labor for many years and on a range of issues, including the sector growth strategies, which is also where our relationship was formed, the future of work, employment and skills development, health and enterprise development. She's an attorney by profession and holds a BA, LLB, and LLM from the University of the Witwatersrand. Tanya, great to have you on the panel today. Can I ask you to start this discussion by saying a few words about yourself, your perspective on those elements I talked to, and then I'm going to come back to you after that and ask you a very specific question about that talks to the theme of today's conversation. Over to you, Tanya.
Thanks, Andy, and thanks, Sharon. I think particularly in relation to the area you've asked us to address, Andy, is that I want to give a little bit of insight from our perspective, having engaged from the PPGI angle. So obviously it was an incredibly uncertain time, and I think to a large extent South Africa had the benefit of a late early infection, and I think we also had the benefit of being able to learn from other countries, the UK included, in terms of how to deal with the pandemic from a regulatory and a policy perspective. I think we had the benefit in terms of being able to give our health capacity time to get there, and we had the benefit of some of the medical advances that were being made. So that was, I think, a function of the fact that our infection rates started somewhat later than Europe, certainly. And it was also because we went into a really early and hard lockdown. And that was a decision that was, I think, from a business perspective, both welcomed, because the view was that it had to happen soon, because we had to take account of the large population that would not have medical coverage. But I think it was also something that was feared by many of the business sectors because of the obvious impact that it would have on livelihoods and ability to sustain ourselves. And government did come in with a raft of relief measures. So these included everything from a credit guarantee scheme for businesses, the social grants, which went to over 18 million people. It included unemployment insurance and payment to people who were laid off work, and distribution of things like food parcels directly. So those were like a package of government interventions. But I think we have to acknowledge it from the start that our fiscal capability to actually stick it out as long as we needed to contain the virus was limited. And that's where I think the way in which we saw leadership coming to the party was really instructive, because it was a form of leadership that was inclusive, it was consultative, it took advice from business on the economic issues, it took advice from the Ministerial Advisory Council on health issues, and it really looked at a combination of the social and the health and the economic factors. And I think that we do have to acknowledge that under those uncertain circumstances, it was an exceptionally difficult task. But what we did see is things like very early regulatory requirements that everyone wear masks in the essential sectors, as well as the sectors that then came online. And I think what we also saw was a very human-centered approach to the pandemic. In the early stages, what government was very effective at doing was coordinating across different government departments, making speedy decisions. Now, I don't think I've ever seen that government regulates within a week and then amended overnight, literally to include more categories when the first lockdown came into operation, which they did. And I think that to a large extent, the human-centered approach was seen in terms of the leadership displayed from the president, who really used the opportunity to say, let this be a unifying call, let it build social cohesion. That was at the start of the lockdown. We went through a difficult patch when level 4 was introduced, and there was a lot of irrationality in some of the provisions of the legislation. But that after a few weeks actually was addressed. And I think what we're starting to see is that there's a level of stability again and confidence in the process. That was also obviously in the context of the risk-adjusted approach and the different alert levels that have come into effect. But I think if we look at how the country has managed the process overall, it's been a remarkable shift, because we really have done things considerably differently to what we normally do. And I think that it really has demonstrated that we can be agile and we can be innovative, and that we can actually do things very quickly when we put our minds to it.
Tanya, the level of collaboration between business and government and the other social partners, labour and the communities, has had a great impact on the way in which countries have responded to COVID-19. Balancing the priorities of the state with those of business is never easy. We appreciate that, I think. Mm-hmm. Please, will you share with us the role that the Public-Private Growth Initiative and other lobbying negotiating forums have played, and share with the audience, how did business engage with government and how effective was that engagement, and to what extent is it continuing? I know you've touched on some of it, but quite specifically about those points.
Yeah. So the Public-Private Initiative is essentially a sector growth-based initiative. And what we seek to do is unblock challenges that enable growth. That's our ordinary role. But what happened during COVID is that we took a significant detour and we started applying our unblocking capabilities to the problem. And Andy, it was actually you that initiated the approach to essential sectors, because you came to us about 2-3 weeks before the lockdown came into effect and indicated that you were really worried about the fact that the contact and traded services were going to be not declared essential. And what we started doing as a result of that was putting together a list to demonstrate where in your industry's essential sector services would be provided, both locally and internationally. And we engaged with our government counterparts and said, is this useful? And they said, absolutely, please. And can you do that for other sectors as well? So what we did is that with the sectors, we plotted and created basically lists of what were regarded as essential sectors. So, for example, if one regarded food as essential, is that we would literally say, well, you then need to have the chemicals that would go into the food. You need to have the water supply. You need to actually trace it back throughout the supply chain. And that was a process that we worked on intensively in the just before the lockdown. Government was incredibly appreciative of the input because they were able to get the input from us very quickly. They didn't necessarily have the business insights that the sectors had, and it was a way that they were able to incorporate the information into the legislative framework. And when I say that they amended legislation overnight, one of the things that they did overnight when the lockdown was coming into effect was actually supplement that essential sectors list, because not all the areas had been identified. So that started a process of engagement between business and government that actually formed the foundation of the response, because very soon what we started doing was identifying blockages in terms of how the law was being implemented or where the law was actually defective. And we had a daily engagement with representatives from different sectors. It started off as being the essential sectors, where they would actually tell us what their blockages were. We confined them to the top 3 because there were huge numbers of challenges. And we would consolidate that and engage with government and systematically try and unblock. That led to protocol development. It led to a community of practice where we were able to learn from each other, different sectors understanding where they could do things differently. It led to the risk-adjusted framework, which I think South Africa was one of the leading countries in terms of the risk-adjusted approach and different alert levels. And it certainly, not only was it partnerships that enabled that, in terms of partnerships between business and civil society and government, But those partnerships have actually been really enduring. And those continue, and actually there's new partnerships and new levels of engagement in terms of how do we move forward into the recovery phase.
Tanya, thank you. And that's the perfect point for me to move on and introduce our next panelist, Reshni Singh. Gives me great pleasure, Reshni, to welcome you. Reshni is the Director of Global Business Services in the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. You've heard Tanya talk about the relationship between business and government. I can't understate the importance of that relationship and the role that the BPGI played and government played in enabling the sector to continue. Reshni is responsible for strategy formulation, management, implementation, and administration of the Global Business Services Incentive Scheme, amongst other things. But they form an integral part of South Africa's value proposition to the global markets, and they've done so for many years and have been fundamental to much of the success that South Africa has now achieved in exporting services to these global sourcing markets. Reshni has also contributed to the customized sector strategy that looks broadly at other subsegments. So it's not just BPO and call centers, but shared services, digital technology, legal process services that are also key subsectors in this particular sector. Reshni, if I can ask you to say a little bit about the context that we set, after which I'd like to ask you a particular question as a representative of national government. Thank you, Reshni.
Andy, good afternoon, everybody. I want to start off by thanking Sharon and the Chamber for creating this opportunity. So thank you very much, Sharon. I'd like to start off, without being repetitive, I think Tanya's done a fantastic job in capturing the essence of COVID-19 and the impact on the South African economy. So I will keep that very brief. And I would have to agree that the impact of COVID on the South African economy has certainly been significant. Just like most economies across the globe, the level of uncertainty and panic created mayhem across both the public and the private sector. As government, we tried our best to contain the situation, and through the process, we encountered various challenges and obstacles. While we were able to conquer some of these challenges, others were somewhat more difficult and beyond our control. For example, it resulted in approximately 3 million people losing their jobs due to the pandemic. The GDP in the second quarter contracted by 51% on an annualized basis. So as bleak as the economic outlook is currently, there have certainly been a few success stories, such as the GBS sector. With regards to the UK and the relationship between the UK and South Africa, it's always been a very significant relationship, as trade partners. The UK has been our primary source market for the GBS sector for a number of years. There has been significant growth and collaboration between the two countries. And as a government representative here today, I'm hoping, to take away from this an opportunity to share share on both sides. We'd love to also get feedback from the UK in terms of, especially when it comes to end user experiences. But more importantly, I think, is to let the UK market and other markets that are represented here this afternoon know that South Africa is open for business. We are agile and we are willing to make the compromises and the sacrifices needed to ensure that business continues. I think that's what's important. So from an introduction, I think that's me. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Reshni. And you have touched on some of these challenges, but I mean, we know that all countries and economies around the world have just taken a huge knock, both economically and socially. We're all grappling and dealing with it in our different ways across the world. South Africa was in a particularly tough position before we went into lockdown, with slow growth, very close to zero growth, high levels of unemployment. The president has spoken a lot about recovery, the recovery plans, and they've been formulated with all the social partners really working hard behind the scenes on them. And he's also spoken about the opportunity to use this disaster as something that we can make something good out of by reshaping the economy structurally, and by working with all the social partners to create a better society for all in South Africa. The question for you is, how does the GBS sector feature in these plans? And what gives you the hope and the confidence that this sector can make a meaningful contribution to these growth and recovery plans?
Thank you, Andy. So the GBS sector has demonstrably been one of the more resilient sectors in the economy during the pandemic. As you have already heard, the collaboration between government and the private sector was key in achieving an essential service status, as well as the ability to create hybrid working solutions to ensure that end customer expectations were met. As a national government department leading the sector growth and development strategy, the DTIC has embraced the call of the president to assist the economy in its recovery plan. And as such, we have redesigned our strategy to encompass a broader scope of support mechanisms. And I'll mention a few, such as enhancing skills development amongst unemployed youth, creating a more targeted marketing approach in source markets, mobilizing the industry and key stakeholders to match demand and supply initiatives, increasing the service offerings across different sector verticals, and last but not least, creating a robust enabling environment through cost savings, infrastructure, and leading technologies. Some of the key plans of action from a government perspective would also include the rollout of affordable broadband and boosting internet and data connectivity for work from home solutions, improving and building the capacity of the state to ensure implementation of key growth strategies across sectors such as GBS, increased infrastructure development, and mass employment programs, of which GBS is seen as a key enabler. So I am confident that a structural reform based on strong collaboration between government, social impact facilitators, and business will be a blueprint, will be the blueprint for a positive growth trajectory. And this particular sector has provided a compelling proof of concept thus far. So I'm confident that we would be able to support, assist, and roll out this across various sectors, not just GBS. And I mean, based on what Tanya has said as well, a lot of what has happened and a lot of the learnings through COVID has been about learning from each other and using best practice and rolling that out across different environments. And I think that is how we're going to recover out of this. Thank you, Andy.
Thanks very much, Reshni. And you and Tanya from the business lobbying side and government side have spoken a lot about this collaboration, about the path ahead. It really gives me great pleasure now to introduce one of the two panelists who will speak from the operator and client side. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome you, Martin Rowe. Martin is the Group Chief Executive Officer of CCI Global. Martin has a long time in this, a lot of experience in the sector, more than 20 years in the business process outsourcing industry. He's worked in the UK, the States, India, Egypt, and South Africa. Martin set up BPO contact centers all over the world for clients in different industry verticals. They include telecommunications, financial services, energy, gaming, and technology. And he's negotiated more than $1.5 billion worth of BPO contracts in his time, and he has a long way to go still. And throughout his career, he's developed a deep understanding of BPO from both a commercial and a client perspective, having worked in just about every role that you could have, from operations to commercial and to leadership. Martin, from your perspective, and also knowing that you place business in many countries within the group, including South Africa, please first share with us your take on where we are, and I'll then use that as a lead into a particular question for you. Thank you, Martin.
Okay, thanks, Andy. So it's actually 27 years I've been in the industry, which is a tragedy, but it gives me a lot of expertise and experience, none of which prepared me, I don't think, for COVID, which was, none of us saw it coming, I guess. But now I look at it in terms of a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I think it's somewhat ironic that on a call that's largely about the UK, and I'm a Brit, that I think of it in terms of the end, where we are now, because I think the UK is at best in the middle, but I think South Africa has managed to recover much more quickly than the UK has. But when I think of it as the beginning, the middle, and the end, I also need to think of it in another dimension, which is some distinct groups of people and how it would and has impacted them. There's of course the employees, and as you say, we've got more than 10,000 employees in Africa, 9,000 or 8,500 of whom are in South Africa. We have customers all over the world, in South Africa, in Kenya, in the US, in Australia, and of course in the UK. And they themselves have customers. We work with big telcos, insurance companies, retailers, and the like. I have shareholders, of course, and I also have the wider economy. So I think of it in terms of that dimension, and I think of it in terms of the three dimensions of the beginning, the middle, and the end. But there's also another dimension, which is the strategic dimension. How would and how has COVID impacted the industry more broadly, and how do I think about it strategically? So at the beginning, it was absolutely catastrophic. I had to think about how are our 9,000 employees, first of all, going to be kept safe with an unknown novel virus that had the potential to be devastating to their health and their safety. And also, of our 9,000, 8,500 employees in South Africa, nearly 70% of them are women. And those women typically support large extended families. And they also typically live in multiple occupancy households, which is an additional component of risk with a coronavirus outbreak. So what we did at the very beginning, in consultation with you and the government departments and Reshni and Tanya and lots of other people, and I've never written so many letters in my life, is that we effectively brought all of those individuals together in terms and to bring a protocol together from a health and safety perspective. And we, alongside our colleagues, built an environment that was safe for our employees to work in. And of course, those that could work at home did work at home, but lots of the activities that we undertake are highly secure. They don't lend themselves, or it's not permissible to work from home. So we effectively implemented a massive scale testing, track and trace. We implemented doctors and nurses, large scale PPE, hospital grade cleansing multiple times a day. We provided food and transport. And what we've done more recently is effectively rebuilt our entire physical environment in conjunction with the industry body, with Andy and others, to have a world-class physical environment, which means that our aim has been reached, which is for the brick and mortar environment we operate is safer than people's own homes. So we tick the box in terms of keeping our people safe. And that's evidenced through some of the statistics that we've had in our own business. Second priority was our customers and how their customers are going to be impacted by this. So we had a hard shutdown. The hard shutdown impacted their businesses. We couldn't operate essential services. We had large backlogs of activities, some of which were dealing with the NHS in the UK and retailers who did online retailing of sanitation products, etc. But that was pretty short-lived, and that was pretty short-lived largely because of the collaboration of industry and government. And we quickly worked out that essential services also included those services in international markets, including the UK. And with the health protocols, with the work that we did with the government, we were able to get back up and running in a very, very short space of time in order to bring on essential services to our customers and their customers in the UK. The third group, the shareholders, were taken care of by the first two issues being managed. It's been a devastatingly expensive exercise. And I'm not going to pretend that it's been the most fruitful year in our experience, but it's been a great learning experience, and it implies, or it's explicit, that we as a business, the industry in South Africa, and the South African people, including its government, are resilient. And I think resilience will be front and center in people's buying decisions moving forward, however you can determine what resilience actually means. I think from a short-term perspective, the resilience of South Africans and the concept of, we'll make a plan, which is part of the vernacular in South Africa, meant that, and Tanya hit the nail on the head earlier, and I was part of that process where decisions were reversed and made and policy changed overnight. Very, very decisive government, very, very aggressive and bold decision-making, very, very broad collaboration with industry bodies, government sectors, health, meant that we were able to get things back up and running quite quickly, to the extent that now, at the end bit, we are at 100% of our pre-COVID capacity. And that's nowhere near where I think we're going to get to moving forward. So I'm very optimistic, although it's been a very, very challenging, and I think people talk about V shapes and W shapes and different shapes. This has been a very, very deep V for us, but we're right through on the other side.
Martin, you've spoken a lot about the steps that you took as a large organization to protect your staff, to keep servicing your clients. And it's been incredible to watch how you've managed to do this successfully, notwithstanding the challenges. When you talk about those time frames, please share with the audience your views about the new opportunities that COVID, amidst all the challenge, has actually brought to both CCI Global, but also to the global business services sector in South Africa.
So I've never been more optimistic about the future of the sector in South Africa than I am now. But if you rewind back into April, I could not see a way that anybody was going to make a buying decision without kicking the tires and going to South Africa and coming and meeting our people. And we've almost got 100% hit rate. When people come and see the product, if you like, people will always buy. And my view was, we're never going to do a deal over Zoom. We're never going to be able to get people over the line. And I was very wrong, because where we are today, we've got the biggest order book we've ever had. We've got the biggest sales pipeline that we've ever had. And we're in a very enviable position of actually saying no to people. Now, I have to be honest and say lots of that's being led by the Americans, and the Americans seem to have, inverted commas, recovered from COVID more quickly than my clients and my prospective clients in the UK. But two things have happened, or three things in fact. Firstly, the resilience and robustness of the South African proposition is now proven. We've done it. We've done it, and we've done it better than, faster than, more coherently than our competitors, and our competitors might be India or the Philippines in terms of geographies. We've proven that. Our buyers, or our clients, or prospective clients, have now got a completely different attitude when it comes to risk. Whereas they would historically have been perfectly happy to have a geographic risk, whether that's in the Philippines or India, or even onshore in their own countries, including the UK, now have to, want to, must make decisions that protect them from issues such as a coronavirus outbreak or weather or whatever it might be in the future, which again adds into that value proposition of robustness and solidity of the South African value proposition. And it means that people now are prepared to talk to us. And during the COVID epidemic, I've done lots of conversations on Zoom, and I'm an old-fashioned guy and didn't think it would work, but it has worked. And we today are ramping faster than we've ever ramped before. We're delivering 1,000 jobs for 2 American clients, and they want those jobs in the next 6 or 8 weeks. We've ramped most of our UK clients, and we've actually recovered way better than we ever thought. And the platform that we have now moving forward gives me lots and lots of confidence that 2021 and beyond will begin to reap the benefits of the framework, the groundwork, and the foundations that we've laid during the COVID epidemic. And whilst it's been the worst period of my career, undoubtedly, I think hindsight will actually lead me to the conclusion that it's going to probably be the best.
Martin, thank you. And I think that just so highlights how opportunity can arise from the face of such huge challenge. I want to move over to our last panelist, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Matt Conn on the other side of the world in Australia. Matt is the Group Chief Revenue Officer for Merchants. Matt's been an active and passionate supporter of the South African GBS sector for many years. He's spoken at many industry events worldwide, and he publishes articles as well on a range of subjects relating to the sector. Matt was appointed as Chief Revenue Officer in 2018. There's huge experience in managing large operations and delivering award-winning customer service spans many years. I think it's more than 20, including leading Australia's second largest ISP to deliver operations that provided industry-leading and best practice customer experiences. Matt's experience extends to outsourcing in regions that include the Asia Pacific, India, the Americas, and of course, South Africa. Matt, great to have you on the panel, and having heard what Martin said, it would be great to hear your perspectives on where we are before I ask you a pointed question. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Look, Martin certainly covered some of the key points, and I think there are some very common threads across the whole group. Look, the people aspect, and if we look at challenges that this situation brought us, looking after our people and being able to develop the policies, being able to develop the approach that protected our people and ultimately, therefore protected, obviously the delivery to our clients was really forefront. Having delivery regions across the globe, not just in South Africa, but also in Asia and North America, really highlighted that the collaboration within South Africa and within the industry itself, specifically focused on how we look after our people, how we create the safe environment for them, absolutely came to the fore. I think the adoption of industry standards, which obviously merchants had a lot to do with, and was adopted and collaborated and built and developed, certainly put us in a really good position right at the start to be able to deliver through the pandemic. One of the things that I certainly saw through this was that the COVID-19 situation and the pandemic itself obviously provided a number of challenges, but what it really also did was reinforce the value proposition of South Africa. The strength of the infrastructure, the operating models, the innovative thinking, and the ability for the people and business to be completely resilient was something that really shone, particularly when compared to other regions across the globe. One of the things that I certainly look at when we do this is, what are the expectations of clients? And I'll get onto that obviously shortly, Andy. But when you look at the overall COVID situation, one of the things that I think Martin really hit the nail on the head is that, yes, it was difficult. Absolutely, from a South African perspective, there was a lot of investment that was required. There was a lot of work required to get through a period of time. And there was a lot of things that were done that we never thought we may have to do. The reality, however, is it has absolutely set the industry and overall business within that industry up for success moving forward. It has absolutely highlighted South Africa on a global playing field in terms of this particular industry. It's highlighted our ability to operate through this. It's highlighted our ability and speed to be able to change tack, to be able to support our clients regardless of region or industry, and be able to bring that innovative thinking to those methods. Now, if I look back and start to look at what happened over the last 6 months, if someone had asked me whether we would have 70% of our workforce with the ability to work from home seamlessly and without significant impact to customer experience delivery, I probably would have, told you to tell me a different story and start telling me the truth. But looking back in 6 months, to be able to implement that, across many thousand people is quite significant. The ability to utilize the real estate or network of sites that you have so that you can enable social distancing, enable blue-red teams, enable the separation of operations from a continuity point of view, is also been a massive, success for the business and the overall industry as well. I think when it comes to the support from the government and the collaboration, this has really given us the framework to operate. However, I think what speaks volumes about the situation and how the South African industry dealt with it really comes, to some of the quality of the players in that market. It's one thing to have the supporting structure, which was phenomenal. The collaboration from BPESA and the government to be able to put that framework in place was equally matched by the ability for each of the operators to actually come to the fore with a delivery of service that was exceptional, a delivery of service that was second to none when you compare it to what could be classed as major competitors from a BPO sector or industry to South Africa. And I think at the end of the day, when I look at the COVID situation, the challenges were there. I think in hindsight, those challenges are going to make us all strong, and I certainly agree with Martin on that. I also agree that the opportunity that's come from this and the ability to really display the value proposition of South Africa, whilst I would hate to go through this again, it was an opportunity that provided, I guess, that ability to bring that to the fore for everyone watching.
Matt, customer experiences and customer expectations have also changed during this period quite significantly. As the lockdown has really caused such disruption across the global markets. In the merchants world, you've got clients in all the major source markets. You're at the forefront of leading your business development. What changes do you experience in your clients' expectations? And specifically, what changes do you experience that give you the optimism you've been expressing about the real growth potential for not just your group, your business, but for South Africa in general?
Yeah, look, I think it's an interesting one, Andy. I think when you look at customers in general, and I talk about the end customers here, what we've seen during the pandemic period, I guess, is at the start, the expectations of end customers was relatively forgiving, for want of a better word, in terms of they realised what business was going through, they realised what the world was going through, they realised the impact that had to the delivery of what they needed or the services they required. However, what's happened now is that's kind of vastly dissipated, and what's come out now is that those expectations from what we class as pre-pandemic times have certainly come back, but not only have they come back in their current form, they've actually come back with an expectation for more. They've seen the ability for business to innovate during that period. They've seen the ability for industry to innovate during that period and change and start to deliver services or the quality of services above and beyond what they'd experienced before. Therefore, the customer's expectations is really going to start to drive that of general business and ultimately what will end become our clients. Now, when I look at some of those expectations, some specific ones are certainly obviously the strength of continuity. Now, I don't necessarily mean a strong business continuity plan. What they're expecting now is a model that has inbuilt continuity in it. Now, that is a model that's balanced between both bricks and mortar and other solutions, whether that be rural-based contact centers, whether that be work from home solutions, or whether that be a blend. The expectation is that I want a level of service that can provide that seamless delivery and that inbuilt continuity without actually having to have an event triggered as a result of something that may impact my business. Outside of that, the stability of infrastructure and operations in general, that expectation now, while South Africa led the way, and from a merchant's perspective, we had less than 3% downtime during the whole pandemic. Now, when you compare that to obviously other regions across the world in terms of this industry, that is quite phenomenal. And that speaks volumes, not just of obviously what we've done, but the industry as a whole in South Africa. What comes with that is the expectation of the clients to see that constantly be delivered. And so those expectations are certainly growing. I think at the end of the day, what we need to continue to deliver is on the innovation that we've put in place over the 6 months, and that is what is going to be required from our clients. I think with that in mind, and the fact that the value proposition was highlighted during this pandemic for South Africa, I certainly see a lot of positive coming from an industry perspective and a lot of growth and obviously a lot of support from the international markets. So in short, I think it's quite exciting times ahead.
Matt, to you, Martin, Roshni and Tanya, thank you so much for those perspectives. And with that, I'll hand back over to you, Sharon.
Thank you very much, Andy, and to the team, Matt, Martin, Reshni, and Tanya. Those have been unbelievably enlightening words coming from 4 such completely different perspectives. Andy, I do have a question of yourself, but I just want to ask one question first, and I don't know who is going to be the appropriate person to answer it. Maybe you can decide who should answer this question. But it's one that came to mind to me while I was listening. And anybody else who wants to add to our Q&A, can you please put your questions onto the Q&A site, the text opportunity, and I'll pick up your questions. But mine is, you talked about the ability, you had a very low downtime. You got 70% of the people in the industry potentially that are working from home. So technology has supported it, speed of change of environment, location, handling security, all those kind of issues have been dealt with. What I ask is, and something I ask of the boards that I often operate with, is how are you going to handle retaining culture that you build within the business at the delivery level? So if, for example, I've been in a number of your business processing environments in South Africa, Johannesburg and Durban, I think Cape Town as well. And it's a lot of people that have been together. There's a lot of collective camaraderie and breaking together in their lunch breaks, and the cycle of people as they work through the day and feed off each other in a way they can't do in a multi-purpose, multi-occupational home that they might be operating from. Yes, they don't have to travel to work, but how is this industry of such large numbers of people going to maintain culture, ethics, integrity, delivery, quality when everyone's at home? Nearly everyone's at home. CCI did give us an example, not everyone's at home.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Martin to start with the response, and then I'm going to ask Matt to add to that, because both those organizations really just lead the way in terms of culture and what they do for their staff. And I know they've been thinking and working at this for a long time. So Martin, over to you first with some time for Matt to add to that.
Yeah, so conscious of time, so we don't believe that the future is a fully at-home proposition. We believe that the future is a blended or an integrated proposition where people have the option to work at home some of the time, and we would expect people to be together some of the time. And we think that's really important to get that culture and to get that working together, the collaboration, to get the ingenuity, to really drive forward what is the South African value proposition in our opinion. And just very briefly, the South African value proposition for buyers of services in South Africa is not labour arbitrage, it's high quality outcomes. And we think to get quite high quality outcomes, you do need people to come together. And we do think coronavirus will eventually go away. In between now and then, we're going to work with some of the more unique solutions that we've developed in conjunction with Matt at Merchants and the industry more broadly. So we think a blended model is likely to be the future. Some people will always work at home, some people will always work in the office, and some people work in between the two. I also think that at a psychological level that most people actually like some element of being together and collectively in a group. And we have a culture that is more leaning towards those group-led activities. So that would be my quick answer for you.
Fantastic, yeah, Martin and Matt.
Yeah, and to elaborate on that, look, I think Martin's spot on. I think it is a blended model is the way forward. Work from home isn't a new concept to the industry. Work from home has been around for many years, but there is also a reason that in regions like the UK or Australia and some others, that the actual level of work from home in this industry has never gotten past 7 or 8%. The infrastructure's been there to support it, but the reality is, the ability to find the right people to work in that environment that actually embrace it and can embrace it and obviously adapt to the culture of the business remotely, it takes time and takes innovation to do that. I do think that ability has been increased, and the innovation to support people in their learning and their involvement with the business and their brands they support has improved. But ultimately, the key to the success of this is finding the right people that fit the different models, whether that be, to Martin's point, a bricks and mortar, a work from home, or a balanced model. At the end of the day, I agree. I think we're going to see a blended model, but we're going to see a significant amount of innovation for those that choose to work in that blended model, to enable them to be able to learn, to build culture, to experience culture like never before.
Thank you. It answers my question very nicely. I think it is going to be a learning experience for all of us. I've got one last question I'd like to put to you before, Andy, I give to you to sum up. You used terms earlier between you of making a plan. There's the good South African term of boer maak 'n plan. In other words, we make a plan, we get things done. As a South African nation, the half full glass is the worst it gets to. It's usually totally full glass. And we talk about the economy, the nation, obviously, at times taking itself to the brink. And yet, whether it's political, economical, fiscal, or financial, we seem to survive and to cope in times of absolute stress. What you guys have just explained is exactly that has happened again through the COVID environment. The question I'd like to pose to both Reshni and Tanya is having a look at how government and business are going to take that can-do attitude. And you've talked in both cases about the challenges and how to get past them. This is something that it would be wonderful where we sit from a business perspective to see that can-do culture, that solution culture being driven more specifically in both business and business with government and government within itself. So if I could ask Andy, if you want to direct it appropriately, but that is our last question before the summer.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask Reshni to start and Tanya to add to that and close on that answer.
Thank you for the question, Sharon. Like I mentioned when I chatted earlier on, the key to the success, especially around a time like this, has been the collaboration between government and the private sector. And we are seeing that this blueprint, when Tanya mentioned BPESA reaching out to PPGI, asking them to so-called lobby with government to be able to get the essential services status, etc. That was a very clear blueprint. I think that would be the right word of how government actually needs private sector to drive certain initiatives or certain changes in behavior, in regulatory environments, in whatever it takes. So being a government official, I can honestly tell you that I cannot drive industry change and grow it without industry actually advising me and being part of the solution, offering the problem as well as possible solutions. And as government, we are able to then collaborate and drive and make whatever changes are necessary. So from where I'm sitting, I definitely see that as the opportunity, but and something that's been rolled out across other sectors. And I think Tanya would also agree and allude to the fact that many other sectors have actually learned from this and have been able to adopt a similar model. So I'll allow Tanya to maybe add to what I've said. Thanks.
Yeah, so Sharon, I think you're absolutely right, is that we are a country that tends to operate well under crisis, and I think that was what was demonstrated here. But I think that what it's done is it's given us a little bit of a wake up. I think that in many sectors, we've been busy with government in a master plan process where a number of sectors have been identified for planning and prioritizing at a sector level, where they've brought together government and industry and labor to do that. And that process has definitely been reinvigorated by the experience that we've had over the last few months. I think the relationships have strengthened. And what we're finding is that there's a far greater degree of urgency to get things done. So the focus really now is on prioritization and implementation, and how do we continue to actually build on the collaboration that we managed to achieve in the last couple of months.
Tanya and Reshni, Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. I don't know if you want some closing quick sentence or two, Andy, as we are overrunning on time, which I don't enjoy doing.
Very quickly, Sharon, I think it's a tough situation, but much work has been done by business and government to contain the pandemic, to help recover and to stimulate growth inclusively. This is really creating opportunities for business in the UK and South Africa and through sectors like ourselves. Second point, I think the UK-SA relationship, as always, is really, really special. We should continue to use platforms like the Chamber of Commerce that you run and all other channels to keep engaging with each other, keep supporting each other. We need to make this work together. And then lastly, I want to thank the audience. I want to thank the panelists, and I want to thank you and your team for hosting this wonderful session. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Appreciate it. I'd like to just sum up the observations I picked up from the conversations with the panel, and maybe they could all come on and show their faces, because I don't like looking at your names only. It'd be nice to have you all join me at the last moment. What I found inspiring was the degree to which you have talked about the human person, individual, staff member, stakeholder, welfare importance of what the pandemic has brought. I don't think South Africa has been unique in that respect. I think most companies and countries have realized how important that is. But I think that what has worked extremely well, and that's the South African innovative can-do policy, which I've seen wonderfully has promoted itself through to working with government listening. I've heard from many sectors the improvement between government and business. And yes, to the brink edge, we've delivered as a country, and it's very nice to hear from both Martin and Matt how South Africa has led the way in actually getting the solutions which many other countries have engineered. And I think one thing that I've heard from all of you is how South Africa knew what was coming quite a bit before it did. I think the rest of the ostriches weren't in Africa. They definitely weren't in South Africa and Otswana. They were somewhere else in the world. And you guys seem to have started working on these things well in advance. So it's an international problem we've been faced with. And Martin and Matt have showed with us how any risk department of any of their businesses globally or at the head office would never have dreamt of something that was going to hit every single office in every single country on every continent that you would not have expected. Nobody would have planned for this. So it's wonderful to hear the success stories that have come out of it. I'd like to close by saying a huge thank you to all of you. What I really appreciated was the diversity of input that we had in the session. Andy, you put together a phenomenal panel. Thank you, Andy, first of all, for leading this and making it happen. To Tracy, who is visible, if she wants to put her video on, who did the logistics behind making this happen. To Stuart, who made sure the technology has occurred. And to Tanya, Reshni, Matt, and to Martin. Thank you very, very much for your insights. They're hugely appreciated by everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you.